The speedometer climbed past 90. James Dean leaned into the curve, his silver Porsche 550 Spider glinting under the California sun. It was September 30th, 1955. Just hours earlier, a German mechanic named Rolf Wüthrich had tried one last time to talk him out of driving. Dean had smiled that crooked smile everyone knew from the movies and said what he'd been saying for weeks. My fun days are coming to an end. 7 days before, he'd looked directly into a camera during a safe driving PSA and delivered the line with unnerving sincerity. The life you save might be mine. At a gas station that morning, another driver pulled up beside the Spider. Dean was showing it off, proud as a kid with a new toy. The driver asked if it was fast. Dean nodded. Fast enough to get me killed. At 5:45 p.m., at the intersection of routes 466 and 41, a 1950 Ford Tudor turned left across Dean's lane. There was no time to brake. The impact folded the Porsche like paper. Dean's neck snapped on impact. He was 24 years old. He'd owned the car for 9 days. But here's what makes people still talk about it 70 years later. It wasn't just the quotes. Dean had become obsessed with death in his final weeks. He'd tell friends he wouldn't live to see 30. He'd grown withdrawn, almost fatalistic. Some who knew him said it was like he was watching himself from outside his own body, narrating his own ending. Was it intuition? A death wish wearing the mask of prophecy? Or had James Dean simply driven too fast, too young, and left behind quotes that would be reread as omens only after the wreckage had been cleared from the highway? Either way, he wasn't the first to see it coming. 52 years earlier, on a spring morning in 1903, a man sat in his Connecticut study writing a letter to a friend. Mark Twain was 67 years old, his white hair wild as ever, his wit still sharp enough to cut glass. But lately, he'd been talking about endings, not his books, his life. I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835, he wrote. It is coming again next year and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't. He wasn't being poetic. He meant it. Halley's Comet appears roughly every 75 years. Twain had been born 2 weeks after its closest approach in November 1835. The comet was due to return in April 1910. Twain told anyone who would listen, the Almighty had said, "Now here are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together, they must go out together." For 7 years he repeated the prediction. At dinners, in letters, to his family. It became a running theme, almost a joke, except Twain never really joked about death. He'd lost his wife, his son, 2 daughters. He knew grief better than most men know success. April 20th, 1910. Halley's Comet reached its perihelion, the closest point to the sun. It blazed across the night sky, visible to the naked eye. The next day, April 21st, at 6:22 in the evening, Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, died of a heart attack in his home in Redding, Connecticut. He was 74 years old. The comet hung in the sky above him. Astronomers call it coincidence. Actuaries point to life expectancy. But Twain had predicted not just his death, but its timing, its poetry, its cosmic punchline. He'd written his own obituary in the stars, and when the comet left, so did he. But sometimes the warning doesn't come from the heavens. Sometimes it comes in the dark, while you're sleeping. April 1865, Washington, D.C. The Civil War was ending. President Abraham Lincoln had carried the weight of a fractured nation for 4 years. He looked older than his 56 years. His face was lined, his eyes hollow, and for days he'd been telling people about a dream. He described it to his wife, Mary, to his bodyguard, Ward Hill Layman, to members of his cabinet. In the dream, he was walking through the White House. The halls were silent, but he could hear sobbing. He followed the sound downstairs, room to room, but every room was empty. Finally, he entered the East Room. There was a catafalque, a raised platform draped in black. On it lay a body wrapped in funeral vestments. Soldiers stood guard. Mourners wept. Lincoln approached one of the soldiers and asked, "Who is dead in the White House?" The soldier looked at him and said, "The president. He was killed by an assassin." Lincoln told this dream to multiple people in the days before April 14th. Some begged him to increase security. He waved them off. "I have had the same dream 3 times, he said. But he didn't cancel his plans. That night, he went to Ford's Theater. He sat in the presidential box with Mary, watching a comedy called Our American Cousin. At 10:15 p.m., during the 3rd act, John Wilkes Booth entered the box and fired a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head. Lincoln died the next morning at 7:22 a.m. 2 days later, his body lay in the East Room of the White House, on a catafalque, draped in black. Soldiers standing guard, mourners filling the hall, exactly as he'd seen it. Historians debate whether Lincoln truly had prophetic dreams or whether the stress of constant death threats had planted the image in his mind. But the detail, the repetition, the specificity of the East Room, it's hard to dismiss. Lincoln had seen his own funeral, and then he attended it. Jump forward a century. Los Angeles, 1970. Jim Morrison was 27 years old, the lead singer of The Doors, and by all accounts, unraveling. He drank too much. He showed up late to concerts or didn't show up at all. His bandmates were exhausted, his lyrics had grown darker, and he kept talking about Paris. "I'm going to die in Paris," he told friends. "Not maybe, not if things go wrong, just a flat statement of fact. I'll be dead in Paris, 27 years old." He said it so often people stopped reacting. Morrison had always been theatrical, obsessed with death and Dionysian excess. This felt like another performance. In March 1971, Morrison moved to Paris with his girlfriend, Pamela Corson. He wanted to write poetry, escape the chaos of fame, maybe get clean. For a few months, he seemed lighter. Then, on July 3rd, 1971, Pamela found him dead in the bathtub of their apartment. He was 27 years old. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but no autopsy was ever performed. Some say it was a heroin overdose. Others claim foul play. The details remain murky, but the location, the age, the inevitability, Morrison had called it. Was it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Did he drink and drug himself toward the ending he'd scripted? Or had he felt something deeper, some pull toward a specific city, a specific year, a specific fate? The number 27 haunts music history. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, all dead at 27. Morrison was the first to predict it. But not everyone who sees death coming is reckless or self-destructive. Some are at the peak of health, some are careful, some are just unlucky. March 1988, Pasadena, California. Pete Maravich was 40 years old and still in incredible shape. Pistol Pete, they'd called him. One of the most electrifying basketball players to ever touch a ball. He'd retired from the NBA in 1980, found religion, and settled into a quieter life. But he stayed active. He ran. He played pickup games. He took care of himself. Except for one thing. In multiple interviews over the years, Maravich had made an eerie statement. "I don't want to play basketball past 40, he'd said. "I want to die before then. I don't want to be an old man playing ball." On January 5th, 1988, Maravich joined a pickup basketball game at a church gym in Pasadena. He was laughing, joking, playing well. Then, mid-game, he collapsed. No warning, no chest pain. He was dead before he hit the floor. An undiagnosed congenital heart defect had finally caught up with him. He was 40 years old. He'd been playing basketball. Doctors later said it was a miracle he'd lived as long as he did. The defect should have killed him in childhood, but the timing, the setting, the age, Maravich had mapped it out years in advance. And then his heart stopped exactly where he said it would. Coincidence feels too small a word, but sometimes the warning doesn't come from the person themselves. Sometimes it comes from someone watching. April 10th, 1912. Southampton, England. The RMS Titanic sat at dock, gleaming and impossibly massive, the largest moving object ever built by man. Unsinkable, they said. A triumph of modern engineering, passengers boarded by the hundreds, first class, second class, third class, over 2,000 souls all bound for New York. Among them was a second-class passenger whose name has been lost to history, but whose story was documented by multiple survivors. She was a middle-aged woman traveling alone. In the days before departure, she told friends and family she didn't want to go. She'd had a dream, a vivid, terrifying dream. She saw the ship sinking. She saw herself in the water. She saw the lifeboats rowing away. She begged them not to make her board, but tickets were expensive. Passage was arranged. She boarded anyway. 4 days later, at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, the Titanic struck an iceberg. By 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the ship was gone. Over 1,500 people died in the freezing North Atlantic. The woman who'd dreamed the sinking was among them. Other passengers reported premonitions too. A coal stoker who deserted the ship before it sailed, claiming he had a bad feeling. A businessman who cancelled his trip at the last minute, citing a dream. These stories circulated for years afterward, dismissed as coincidence or retroactive storytelling. But some of the accounts came from people who'd written letters before the voyage, documented fears, recorded warnings. Did they sense something? A flaw in the hull? A weakness in the design? Or were they simply anxious travelers on a maiden voyage, and history made prophets of them only in hindsight? The Titanic sank, the dreamers died, and we're left trying to untangle intuition from inevitability. But not all predictions are metaphorical. Some are startlingly literal. June 28, 1914, Sarajevo, Bosnia. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria sat in the back of an open-top car, his wife Sophie beside him. It was their wedding anniversary. They were touring the city, part of a diplomatic visit meant to ease tensions in the Balkans. Security was light. The route was published in the newspapers. That morning, before leaving his hotel, Ferdinand had turned to a military aide and said, "The bullet that will kill me is already on its way." It wasn't poetic. It was almost resigned. Ferdinand had received multiple death threats. He knew the trip was dangerous, but duty demanded he go. Hours later, as his car took a wrong turn down Franz Joseph Street, a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip stepped forward and fired 2 shots. One hit Sophie in the abdomen, one hit Ferdinand in the neck, severing his jugular vein. "Sophie, Sophie, don't die!" Ferdinand gasped. "Stay alive for our children." But both were dead within minutes. Those 2 bullets didn't just kill an archduke, they ignited World War I. 16 million people would die in the conflict that followed, and Ferdinand had known that very morning that he wouldn't survive the day. But what about the ones who write it down? The ones who document their own death so specifically that it becomes impossible to ignore? 1980s, England. A woman in her 30s, her name withheld by her family, began having a recurring nightmare. In the dream, she was driving on a country road. It was raining. Her car skidded on a curve, crossed the median, and collided head-on with a truck. She saw the impact. She felt the steering wheel crush her chest. She woke up gasping. The dream came back every few weeks, always the same road, same curve, same truck. She told her husband, she told her sister. Eventually, she started writing it down in her diary. She described the weather, the color of the truck, the time of day, the location. Then, one afternoon in 1986, she was driving home from work. It started to rain. She turned onto a country road she drove every day. The car hit a wet patch. The wheels lost traction. She overcorrected. The car spun across the median and collided head-on with a delivery truck. She died on impact. The steering wheel crushed her chest. Her family found the diary after the funeral. Every detail matched. The road, the curve, the truck, even the weather. She'd written it months before it happened. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, anxiety mapping itself onto a worst-case scenario until the scenario becomes real. But that explanation falters when you realize she drove that road 100 times without incident. She wasn't avoiding it. She wasn't scared. She was just waiting. And sometimes the prediction doesn't come in dreams or warnings. Sometimes it comes in art. 1. Las Vegas. Tupac Shakur was 25 years old and at the height of his fame, but his lyrics had grown darker. He rapped constantly about death. "I see death around the corner," he said in interviews. In his song, "If I Die Tonight," he wrote, "Tonight is the night I get in some shit." He talked about being killed young. He said he wouldn't live to see 30. He recorded songs that sounded like eulogies. His friends begged him to stop. "You're manifesting it," they said. Tupac shrugged. "I'm just being real." On September 7th, 1996, Tupac attended a Mike Tyson fight in Las Vegas. Afterward, he got into a black BMW driven by Death Row Records CEO, Suge Knight. At 11:15 p.m., at a red light on Flamingo Road, a white Cadillac pulled up alongside them. Someone inside opened fire. Tupac was hit 4 times. He died 6 days later, on September 13th. He was 25 years old. In the weeks after his death, fans pored over his lyrics. They found dozens of references to his own murder, to being shot, to dying young, to leaving messages behind. He'd written his own obituary, line by line, album by album, and then he lived it. But here's the uncomfortable question. Did he predict his death, or did he choose it? Did he court the violence he rapped about? Did he turn prophecy into performance until the two became indistinguishable? Or did he simply see clearly what the rest of us refuse to admit? That some lives end early, and some people know it long before the rest of us do. Because here's the thing about these stories. They unsettle us, not because they're supernatural, but because they're so achingly human. We want to believe death is random, that it sneaks up on us, that we can't see it coming. But these people did. They saw the curve in the road. They felt the comet returning. They heard the soldier's answer in the East Room. They knew. And maybe that's the real horror. Not that death is unpredictable, but that sometimes it isn't. That intuition exists. that our bodies and minds pick up signals we don't consciously register, that we dream our endings because on some level we're already writing them. Psychologists have explanations. Confirmation bias. We remember the predictions that came true and forget the thousands that didn't. Anxiety manifesting as hyper-awareness. Self-fulfilling prophecy. We behave in ways that bring about the outcome we fear. Coincidence. With billions of people on the planet, some will guess right purely by chance. And maybe that's all it is. Maybe James Dean drove recklessly because he believed he'd die young and belief became behavior. Maybe Lincoln dreamed of assassination because he lived under constant threat. Maybe Morrison drank himself to death in Paris because he decided that's where the story ended. Maybe Maravich's heart was always going to fail and the basketball court was just where he happened to be. But then there's Mark Twain, watching the sky for a comet. There's the woman with the diary, describing a crash months before she drove into it. There's Franz Ferdinand, saying goodbye to a bullet that hadn't been fired yet. And we're left with the question we'll never be able to answer. Did they see the future, or did the future see them? These stories live on because they touch something primal, the fear that we're not in control, the hope that maybe, somewhere inside us, we know when the clock runs out, the terror and comfort of believing that death might send a warning before it arrives. We tell these stories around tables and across screens because they remind us that life is both shorter and stranger than we pretend, that 10 people across 100 years looked ahead and saw the end. And whether they were right or simply ready doesn't change the fact that they were gone when they said they'd be. So maybe the question isn't whether premonitions are real, maybe it's whether we'd want to know. If you could see the moment coming, the curve, the comet, the bullet, would you look? Or would you close your eyes and drive a little faster, hoping to outrun what's already been written?